Ladies and gentlemen, the most important thing William Barr is doing is not the Durham probe. The Durham probe, believe me, is very important. We already got Kevin Kleinsmith indicted. So that is very, very important. The people who set up and framed Trump, people like Kleinsmith and others, will eventually face legal repercussions for what they did. The most important thing he's doing, however, is something that Democratic governors and Democratic-run states and mayors within the Democratic Party, something that they do not want to achieve, or they don't want to address, and that is the massive increase in violent crime. And not only the $1.4 billion in property damage. So we're not talking about the fiery but peaceful protests, which is what, it's so hilarious. I mean, CNN gave the election to President Trump. President Trump's going 8 years, like I've been saying for the past 4 years. And I called the 2016 election. NPR quoted me. I said Clinton would lose swing states. She did. I'm telling you, President Trump is going to go 8 years. Now, you know my prediction. Madam Secretary is going to be eventually on that debate stage. And that'll be the biggest political prediction of all time, or just, you know what, a pretty good call. I've been saying for 4 years that President Trump's going 8 years. That's with everything they did to set him up and frame him, and with media apoplectic and hysterical and seething and fuming. But here, Attorney General William Barr and Operation Legend, really quickly, Operation Legend is named after four-year-old Legend Talifaro, whose life was taken on June 29th in Kansas City while he was sleeping because somebody was shooting into his apartment. You have, and we'll get to Legend Talifaro in a couple of minutes, but Democrats aren't talking about this. I wonder why. It doesn't fit their narrative. Democrats have to reduce the biggest issues we face as a nation into good, bad, and the Democratic Party sits on the fence, and everyone protesting is perfect, pristine, wonderful, and they're doing it for only a just cause, and that it is a just cause. People are protesting for a just cause. There's unfortunately, when either during the protests or when the protests subside, there's $1.4 billion in property damage. There have been 10,000 arrests, but Operation Legend, Justice Department says 2,000 arrests for violent crimes in 9 cities. This is September 4th. The Justice Department said agents have arrested more than 2,000 people. More than 2,000 people and over 140 on homicide charges. So, of those arrested, 476 people have been charged with federal offenses. 249 of whom have been indicted on firearms charges. Most of these firearms charges, by the way, are owning a weapon with a criminal background, which is already against the law. So it's really interesting. The left is like, oh yes, gun control. And then there have been 1,000, just in, I mean, it's unbelievable. Just in Chicago alone, since January 1st, 1,000 people who have been shot. This is, New York City. New York City has 1,000th victim. 1,000th victim. 1,000 shooting victim of 2020. And they say gun violence surge. Well, it's violence surge. And you have no clue. I mean, there used to be a phrase called gang violence. Media doesn't use that anymore. Now it's just the gun. That is if it wasn't there, then, there wouldn't be any violence. Well, that's not the case. New York City has the strictest laws pertaining to firearms. And there have been 1,000 shootings in the past month. But here, New York City, you have My God. As of August 9th, there have been as of August 9th, 833 incidents where a person has been shot. 833 incidents. Oh, and 1,017 victims. But that is according to ABC7NewYork.com. But this is interesting right here. Justice Department says, this is UPI, Justice Department says 2,000 arrests for violent crimes in 9 cities. 2,000 people under a 2-month law enforcement initiative targeting violent crime in 9 cities. U.S. Attorney General William Barr launched Operation Legend on July 8th in Kansas City, Missouri, and it expanded to Chicago, Albuquerque, Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee. In August, the mission was brought to St. Louis, Memphis, and Indianapolis. The Justice Department said in a statement Thursday that more than 2,000 people have been arrested. It says 137 here. I read over 140 on homicide charges, including 147. So here's from the Department of Justice. Since the operations launched through Monday, August 31st, 2020, more than 2,000 arrests, including 147 for homicide. And you're talking about $1.4 billion in property damage. And then you're talking about President Trump and William Barr alluding to planes full of people traveling across the country just to cause mayhem and chaos. Of course, Democrats and media and the wonderful publications who hear that President Trump said something racist or said something, to denigrate fallen soldiers, they heard it. This is news to the left. They heard it, so therefore they published it, therefore it's true, and it's been what they heard was confirmed. That's the way they think. President Trump's going 8 years, ladies and gentlemen. They're completely clueless and delusional. The biggest issues like cities being burnt to the ground or property damage or, it's like they say, well, we don't know who's been doing this. Well, police stations in Minneapolis, Portland, and Seattle have all been torched. Who do you think is doing it? It's not Trump supporters. Trump supporters came out with paintballs. Like I think it was either in Portland or paintballs. And then suddenly it's, oh my God, look at the paintballs. And they, meanwhile, it's fiery but peaceful protests. And media is completely delusional. They're completely delusional. They don't see what's actually going on. And the true racists are the people who think that only a certain demographic or a certain group of Americans care about property loss. All Americans care about property loss and property damage. Every single violent protester, every single violent person causing mayhem at like 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning in any major city in the country is giving thousands upon thousands of votes to President Trump. They don't realize this. They're completely clueless. And Democrats say, well, Trump's not really everything is like this snarky, lame comeback, like rebuttal. Oh, well, you know what? Trump wants to be the law and order president, but he's really not winning at that. Yes, he is. Everybody knows that even people who don't like President Trump give him credit for at least addressing the problems taking place. Democrats give tacit approval. No, you can't prove that they give approval. Yes, the tacit approval. When they want to obsess over something, whether it's Trump-Russia, which never happened, whether Trump worked with Russia, which never happened, or Trump withheld military assistance to go after Biden because he was so frightened of Biden. You think that he wants Biden out of the... You think that he wants to go up against anyone else but Biden? Biden would get decimated and obliterated and completely steamrolled during the debates. Even Chris Cillizza of CNN is saying, well, if he just shows up and, acts halfway lucid, then he's won. It's like, no, most people... See, Democrats have such derangement issues pertaining to Trump. They blame him for things he didn't do. They accuse him of saying things he never said. They claim without evidence everything from Tulsi Gabbard being an operative of Russia, to Trump denigrating fallen soldiers, to Trump working with Russia because of a dossier. They literally have fabricated and invented everything. Meanwhile, cities are being burnt to the ground, property is being damaged, and you have, by one estimate, $1.4 billion in property damage throughout the country. And this is happening, and how many black-owned businesses have been destroyed? How many Asian-owned businesses? How many Hispanic and Latino-owned businesses have been destroyed? How many businesses owned by people of color have been tarnished and destroyed and forever? What are Democrats going to say to these people? And you want, like, this whole thing is like, okay, you want to make the world a better place. By what? By intimidation? It doesn't work. Intimidation and violence and property damage only helps President Trump because people see and they say, okay, we have two choices. We know who is looking at this and saying it's peaceful. Media is saying it's peaceful because they can't blame it on Trump supporters, so they're saying it's peaceful. If this was linked to President Trump, could you imagine? They would say our country is falling apart. They're already saying our country is falling apart, but they would say Trump is directly responsible for every dollar of property loss and every life that's been lost because of this. Directly responsible. It's Trump who threw the brick into the window. And I mean, I respect law enforcement. I'm a member of the 1199 Foundation right here, the plaque. And it's a foundation. The link is below, to help the families of fallen California Highway Patrol officers. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful organization. It's completely nonpartisan. They give scholarships to CHP families. It's really wonderful. And the California Highway Patrol does a lot. It's not just a law enforcement agency. I mean, if you get into an accident anywhere on the freeways or highways of California, which are hundreds and hundreds of miles, they help you. They protect you throughout the evening and night from drunk drivers. So they do a lot. But I also understand, even though I respect law enforcement, I also understand Eric Garner was murdered in New York City in 2014 under President Obama's administration with de Blasio and Cuomo and Schumer and Gillibrand, all the morally superior Democrats who were sitting on the fence, giving tacit approval to all this violence and chaos and mayhem. But I understand that Eric Garner lost his life. He was murdered. And had President Obama done something, since Democrats are truly interested in justice and equality, and the Democrats could have right then and there said, look, this is a law. It's federal law throughout the country that law enforcement, if a suspect or if a person is on the ground, you can't put your knee or your boot on the person's neck. And if they say, I can't breathe, and they're already subdued, then you have to let go and let them breathe a little bit. Just let go a little to let them breathe. Then George Floyd would have been alive. He was murdered too in Minneapolis. In a Democratic-run city, state, that's Minnesota, is going Republican for the first time since 1972. Minneapolis. Okay, Democrats have to have high voter turnout in urban areas. These urban areas have been decimated by very peaceful yet fiery protests. And you have, by some estimates, 100-200% increase in violent crime, depending on the city. In Chicago, there have been 1,800 shooting incidents. And you're talking about a gun control city run by Democrats. Well, gee, how come the laws aren't protecting people? That's right, because criminals don't care. If you have Democrats like to, states that allow, that have the most lax gun control laws, you have the most incidents of, you're not talking about suicide you're leaving that out. But also, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is Democrats make the claim laws will protect people. Laws don't when it comes to this. Plus, we have the Second Amendment. If anything, people in these communities, law-abiding citizens, need to embrace the Second Amendment to protect their families. If you lived in an area that you knew that your house was targeted or at risk, or your family, you should want to embrace the Second Amendment. The second I got a death threat from Twitter from a peaceful, wonderful liberal, I embraced the Second Amendment because the law enforcement, the police officer, LAPD police officer said, look, you know what? You're probably going to have to, do what you got to do in terms of the law and the Second Amendment. And God bless this man. He was right. So I've protected myself. Tim Pool has protected himself. Okay? Everyone should. You don't have to be on YouTube. Everyone should. If it's the Second Amendment, so you're right. Shall not be infringed for a reason. It's a God-given right. But anyway, Operation Legend, ladies and gentlemen. Legend Talifaro, 4-year-old black child murdered in his bed. And you have a situation where Democrats don't talk about David Dorn, Burnell Trammell, two African-American men, one is 60 years old, one over 70 years old, murdered. And we know Burnell Trammell was a Trump supporter, and we know David Dorn's wife. And David Dorn was very likely a Trump supporter. And he was protecting his friend's business, and his life ended. I mean, he was murdered on Facebook. You could see what was taking place. And Democrats focus on paintballs and fiery but peaceful protests. They're the most delusional hypocrites, and they lie all the time. Trump doesn't lie compared to them. They're the biggest liars of all time. He never said any. The Atlantic. This is journalism. You cite anonymous sources for a quote. A quote? Usually anonymous sources are like, okay, this is happening, or that's how this money flow is going there. And it's corroborated by not like he said, she said. This is the only time in the history of journalism, one of the few times, where it's like, oh, a quote is attributed because somebody, anonymous officials or people on condition of anonymity. Meanwhile, the DNC emails nobody talks about, and those were the actual words that caused Debbie Wasserman Schultz to resign in disgrace. Anyway, give me your thoughts below. Hillary Clinton's going to be on that debate stage. You watch. And she will be debating Trump. She'll be across that ballot. And I don't care if they'll resend mail-in ballots. There are no rules. There are no rules. Look at the hypocrisy and the duplicity and the disingenuous nature thus far. Every topic, from Tara Reade and Biden to what's going on in cities to the Steele dossier to Kevin Kleinsmith, you don't think they're duplicitous enough to just say, oh yeah, you know what? We need to reprint the ballots, and you know what? We're going to go with Hillary. She's the only chance they have. And that Atlantic article came a day after Clinton was published. So they're losing the election. They don't have enough time. People don't care anymore if Democrats think Trump is racist, or if he's attributed to saying quotes he never uttered. He never stated. President Trump allocated more funding to historically black colleges and universities than any president, including President Obama. President Trump signed the First Step Act. President Trump just recently had 2 major foreign policy achievements. President Trump's economy is rebounding. So go and look what the left-leaning YouTubers are talking about. They're talking about, they have obsessed, their lives are devoted to talking about Dave Rubin because he was on the left and he became a successful conservative pundit. YouTuber. And so they're devoted, they're like literally obsessed with him. Or they're just talking about how they don't like Trump. They're not talking about Biden, they're not talking about the election. There's zero enthusiasm, but every Trump supporter on the planet can't wait to vote, myself included. So who do you think is going to win? Enthusiasm. There hasn't been a campaign that's won the White House without enthusiasm. And this is Helmut Norpoth was talking about this. And he predicted 2016. He's the professor at Stony Brook. that's saying Trump's going to win by a wide margin over Biden. But I think that Clinton's going to come in and she could make it close. She'll still lose to Trump, but that's my prediction. I'm standing by it. Give me your thoughts below. Operation Legend is even more important, ladies and gentlemen, than the Durham probe, and the Durham probe is heating up. Give me your thoughts. Thank you so much. Be here, by the way, at 9 p.m. Pacific, ladies and gentlemen, to my new Patreons. Thank you so very, very much. Your support is greatly appreciated. My Patreon is below. Be here, people, 9 p.m. Pacific tonight. Thank you for the live stream on this channel, and subscribe to H.A. Goodman's other channel right now. Thank you.